Job interviews can be challenging for a lot of people on the autism spectrum. If you process information more slowly or you process information sequentially, what it actually means is that all your thinking capacity will get taken up by the process itself, and what you will not be doing is arriving at the outcome both parties want from that, which is understanding better if they can work together. One reasonable adjustment around job interviews that's very helpful for people with autism is the ability to actually know what the questions are and what the topics of discussion are going to be before the job interview. Now, that's not actually, if you like, prejudicing the outcome of that interview or the answers that people are going to provide. It simply provides people who need a bit of space and time to be able to structure their answers to actually pull together what it is they want to say, so that both parties can get a better understanding of what it will be like to work with one another, and that actually it's a more productive long-term relationship as a result of that interview.
Now I find myself on the other foot, where I'm having to interview people for roles, and I find that really difficult because for me, trying to get a feeling as to whether somebody is suited for the job or not is very difficult. Because you don't know whether the answers that they're giving is what they really think or what they've just rehearsed. And when you're reliant on a kind of social connection with someone in a forced environment, it's very hard to make a judgment one way or another. And I always want to be certain, and you can never be 100% certain. I think as soon as people hear that, that's all they'd hear, and as opposed to the rest of who I am. So often when you talk to people about what it means to be autistic, they will list all of the challenges and, you know, the social elements. And in the work that I do, people are a big part of my job. And while I do struggle a lot with that, I've learned various techniques and strategies to work around that. And I think from my experience, people can be very quick to judge if they don't know who you are, which is why I think we have a long way to go in terms of raising awareness about neurodiversity and what it means to be autistic in the workplace.
So I came out as such when I was at NABS, and I'm still there. I love it there. I don't want to go anywhere. Which means I've never had to disclose my diagnosis in an interview, and the idea of having to do that makes me break out in a cold sweat. I still haven't really decided.
I do mention it maybe at the start of the interview, but like they'll understand kind of my autism and say that I'm autistic throughout my kind of examples of, like, for example, have you used your organisation skills in a thing? And I'd probably talk about something like this or something to do with ambitious. And then through that, the first thing I always say to do with ambitious, for example, was like, oh, it's an organisation helped out by people on the autistic spectrum for people on the autistic spectrum. So it's kind of like, I don't say I am autistic in a robotic voice, but like through contextual clues, they know that I'm autistic.
As a person with autism, I would always recommend disclosing that you have a diagnosis ahead of an interview, so that there's a mutual understanding there of, this is something that affects me. It's also a benefit that I can bring as I can explain at interview. It's also something there where if there is a particular adjustment I feel would be helpful or required, it's flagging that up, it's explaining it. I think it's very helpful for a person with autism when they can actually have those different opportunities for adjustment presented to them. That's not to say that an individual can't themselves request an adjustment that might work for them. It's simply the fact that, especially if it's somebody who's new to the workplace, they may not be so familiar with actually what's either, what to ask, what can actually be helpful.
Reasonable adjustment wise, thinking about it, I'd never really ask for it because I don't know what my opportunities are, I guess, to do. For example, I can read, I can see, I can kind of understand and comprehend the question. So I don't ever really ask for any reasonable adjustments, maybe other than like, just let me have some time to think. But then again, I feel like a lot of people just need time to think, neurotypical regardless.
Any employer-employee relationship that's good as a partnership. And reasonable adjustments is a really good example of this. So It is very much, I think the onus is on the individual to put forward what they need to get their job done to the absolute best of their potential. But I think sometimes it can be helpful to have some thought starters from HR or from a line manager. Often if you're used to working in a sort of standard workplace in a standard role, it can be quite hard to imagine any way that things might be different. So it can be really useful to have a few ideas from the off. Some reasonable adjustments, but it was mostly just, for example, we have a policy about working from home, requiring 24 hours notice. I don't have to give the 24 hours notice because I can't always anticipate when that might be really helpful for me.
Actually, there's usually a lot of flexibility that's available when people just converse, when they have that dialogue, when they have that conversation.
The one which first of all comes to mind is the civil service work experience I had. My manager, I guess at the time, she was happily telling me that it's very flexible, the start and finish time, so I can start whenever I want, finish whenever I want. So I sort of said, oh, if I could come in at like 9:30 and leave it, like 4:30 maybe, or like 5:30 or something, just to kind of avoid that 5 o'clock gap. And she was more than happy with it. In other cases, my permanent job, well, part-time permanent job at the moment, being a help desk assistant, my help desk coordinator, slightly alters her language for me. It may sound more blunt at times, but it does kind of help. Just little alterations, I guess, in language choices. But other than that, in my case, just treat me as you would any other employee.
I've made my own reasonable adjustments in that I now sit down with my team and I've changed the way that we interact and work together. So a lot less ad hoc meetings. If they've got to bring something new to me, they have to email me first because I don't like surprises. And we also have one of the other people in my team to organise social get-togethers where I don't need to do that as a team manager, but then we have scheduled time for social interaction to try and build relationships. So that's what I've done. The biggest challenge for me has been in terms of people management and relationships. I quite often struggle with people, particularly if I don't know them or it's a stressful environment. And that can quite quickly lead to a strain on personal relationships and conflict. And off the back of that, the anxiety that comes from being in a conflict situation and feeling unable to resolve it. But what I'm learning more and more now is that instead of relying on myself to resolve that, I now have 2 or 3 people at work that will now come in and help me through those situations to try and reduce the level of conflict.
I think finding someone on the spectrum who hasn't had any negative experiences of work would be like finding a unicorn, possibly more rare. I think sometimes social masking can make you come across as insincere or fake because people might think that you're being different than they saw you this morning in another context, in another meeting, and they don't realise that actually that's just trying to fit in and be the best version of yourself for a specific situation. So I think sometimes it can be hard to make real connections with people because of that. I think it's quite common to find people on the spectrum who have ended up in bullying situations and not always really recognised it, because if you're really starved for friendship, you might be grateful that someone's being a friend at all, and you might always not realise some of the worst ways that you're being treated.
From my perspective, some of the greatest challenges in the working environment have come in the actual office environment itself, where you've come into work and where things have been different or where things haven't been working. Sometimes these things can seem very trivial, but actually for a person with autism, if that's a part of their routine, that can actually sometimes be a real stumbling block in them being able and feeling comfortable to go about and do your business. So if there is a need for equipment in an office to be repaired or replaced, if there is going to be a move, if something in that environment is going to change, it's really easy, and actually it's very good practice for all staff working in that building simply to communicate that to people, and then it is as least disruptive as it can possibly be. Since I've been promoted at work, I've found it more helpful. I've found that it's meant that I'm able to have more of a dialogue around success, around challenges at work, and being able to plan and to be able to help move things forward so that ultimately all of us at work, we're closer to achieving what we want to achieve as a result of that.
I felt incredibly lucky that my employer, despite my disclosing, saw the value that I could bring, and they promoted me. I felt very, really very lucky. I've not been in a management style role yet, and so I imagine that's going to be a very big transition as and when that happens. But I'm very grateful that I work somewhere that can see past the label.
When I got promoted, it came with new expectations and a lot of uncertainty. So in my role as a management consultant, there's a greater expectation around business development with larger number of clients and larger teams. So how do I take on those additional elements of my job, which are largely down to social skills, whilst finding a way to work around the social anxiety of being in new situations? And so we're talking a lot more collaboratively about how do I upskill some of my more junior members of staff who are sociable so that they can come in and learn what needs to be done and do those elements of my job for me. It's a great opportunity for them because they are able to take on more responsibility than they might get with somebody else at my level. And I think then it's not about what seniority level you are, it's about the safe space and the trust you build within that team or that organisation. I've been at my company now for more than 11 years, so and only, I guess, came out as autistic in the past year. And for those who knew me, it helped to explain a lot of the previous challenges that we had. And so I feel much more accepted now than I did previously. I think I still have a challenge at times, particularly when I don't know people or I'm working with them for the first time. So people that are closer to me now, I tend to explain to them beforehand. And so they become a lot more accepting because they know that where it's coming from.
I'm fortunate in that I am working in a very accepting environment at the moment, and actually it's strengthened our organisation as a result of that. I think working in an accepting environment means that you can have honest conversations about what's going to work for you as an individual, what the requirements of the employer actually are, and to be able to come to a solution, to meet in the middle in a way that means both parties are going to benefit from that.
I'm very lucky to work somewhere that's kind and accepting with people who aren't all cookie cutter, and I feel very grateful that they've been as wonderful to me as they are. People at NABS know that I get really hyper around like puppies, or really sunny days make me really happy, and I'm very passionate about lots of things, but they accept that and they know I'm different, and the oddities and eccentricities are sometimes brighten up everyone's days, but I feel very lucky.
Neurodiversity Champions was set up by Enable-M to champion neurodiversity in the workplace, ensure accessibility, and to ensure that we're a completely neurodiversity-friendly employer. If you'd like to get involved, you can join the Neurodiversity Champions by emailing me on allmeansall@groupm.com.